UiPath Data Service, which is now in public preview, is a tool that brings powerful no-code data modeling and storage capabilities to your RPA processes. It resolves several challenges for the customers and for the RPA developers. But before we start and illustrate those for you, let me quickly chalk out what are the things being covered in this particular video. We'll start with a value proposition for the UiPath Data Service, where we'll see how the needs and wants of the practical situations are fulfilled by the data service. We will also skim through the features and benefits of data service while we are at it. Keeping the video more practical, we'll take the first look at the data service and work through a simple demo. By the end of the video, you'll be able to understand how to provision data service for your tenant, how to create business entities and relationships, how to use these entities in your projects or workflows using Studio. And lastly, we'll have a look at the user management for the entities. My name is Anubhav Shankar. I'm part of the global services at UiPath, and I'll be keeping your company throughout this video. One of the best ways to look at a product is to understand the problems it helped to solve. In this case, automating real-world business processes that involved multiple systems introduced the need to handle and maintain complex business entities throughout the project, which means across the workflows or subtasks. In such situations, developers often face two common challenges. Number one, where to store the data and how to manipulate the data. And number two, how to maintain consistency of variables, which sometimes can range into hundreds across the workflow. There was also a need to ensure that critical business data is not left around on users or robots' machines, shared files, network drives, or cloud storage services like SharePoint or OneDrive. And thus, data service was born. UiPath Data Service brings powerful no-code data modeling and storage capabilities to your robotic process automation projects. Data Service is designed to be fully integrated with UiPath Studio and UiPath robots, allowing you to build powerful automations that can leverage capabilities like rich relational data types, integrated security, and instantaneous provisioning and deployments without worrying about scale. There are a lot of benefits that data service brings with it. First and foremost, it decouples the data from the process workflow, which means you can use the same data model in multiple workflows or different processes that corresponds to the same business entity. The arguments and variables storing various properties of the business entity is now replaced by the business entity model itself, giving you a more comprehensive and readable code. All the business critical data is stored at one secured and scalable central location, which has a role-based access mechanism. This means there is no trade of data within the processes via files, Excels, cloud storage sites, etc., where business critical data might be left inadvertently in traces. Now that we know what pain points data service addresses, what is data service, and what are the benefits that it introduces, let's see the data service in action. For the purpose of the demo and to keep it really simple, I've chosen just a couple of entities. The first entity corresponds to the departments of an enterprise and has the properties like name, director of the department, total number of employees, and the date of inception. The second entity corresponds to employees of the enterprise and has just three fields: name of the employee, role, and department, which makes reference to the name field of the department entity and hence establishing a relationship. Let's deep dive into the demo right away. To start with the demo, the first thing that we are going to look at is how to provision data service for our tenants. To enable data service, you first have to log in into your cloud account and then go to the admin section. Here, In the properties of your tenant, you'll get an option called Edit Services. You click on that, you choose Data Service, and then press OK. Once your Data Services is active, you'll get this particular tab enabled. And once you click on it, this will be your landing page where you can start creating the new entity. Which brings me to the second point that we are going to cover today, and that is how to create entities and relationships. So if we go back to the example that we chose for this particular demo, we had to create two entities. Number one, the department, and the second one, the employee. So we'll start by creating entity for the department. For that, I'll just click on this particular icon called Create Entity and give it a name called Department. I can give a small description what this entity is. Depicts the departments in the enterprise, and I can save it. Once I do that, it gets created. And so when the entity is created, it is created with some built-in field like creation time, created by, etc. You can see the list on your screen right now. To create a new field for this entity, click on the Create New Field icon. Once you do that, you can give the name to it. So the first field for me will be name, and the type of this particular field will be text because it will contain the name of the department, and it will be a required field. If I click on more details, there are certain other parameters that you can specify for this field, but for now this will suffice. I'll click on Save, and this particular field gets added to my entity. Similarly, I'll create other fields, and for the next field that I have is director. So I'll type director. It will also be of type text. This is also a required field, and I'll click on Save. Director gets created. The next field is total employees, depicting the total number of employees there are in the organization, and this will be of type number. So here I would like to highlight the kind of data types that is supported within entities right now, and it will be of type text, number, yes or no, which is basically Boolean, date, time, and relationship. We'll talk about a couple of these in the demo going forward, but right now, because total employees depict a number, let's just select data type as number, and I'll mark this as required field as well, and I'll save this. The next field that I want to create is inception date. I'll just type inception date, and it will be of type date time. It specifically asks me whether this date time field has a time part to it. Now the inception date is basically just date, not exactly going down the details of the time. So I'll just mark it as height time field to be yes. I'll mark it as a required field as well, and I'll save it. I think we are done with all the fields that's there in the department entity. So in that case, let's create the new entity, which will be the employee entity. So I'll click on the create entity, same steps. I'll give it a name called employee. I can give it a small description. Depicts the employees of the enterprise. I'll click on save. And the entity gets created with the same system built-in field, and I'm going to add the fields that I want within this particular entity one by one. For that, I'm going to follow the same steps. I'm going to click on create new field and then give it a name, and here the first field will be name itself. which will be the name of the employee. I'll mark it as a required field, click on save. The second field that I want to create is the role. I'll create new field. I'll give it a name as role. This will also be of type text. I'll save it. And the last one, and the one that I wanted to talk to you in particular about, is the department field. And now the department field, the type of the department field will be relationship. And it will be relationship because we want to relate the department back to the department entity that we had created. And within that entity, specifically to the field called name. What this means is that the department field of the entity employee is going to be related to the name field of the department. I'll mark it as required and I'll click on save. And that's pretty much it. Both our entities are created. To do a manual data entry to one of these entities, we can just select that particular entity. Go to the second tab called data, and I can just say add new data. And here I can give all the values. For example, here I can give the name of the department as sales ops. I can give the name of the director, the total number of employees that are there in this particular department. I'll just say 50. And then I can choose the inception date, which will be, let's take it a little back to 1993, June 17th. And I can hit save. Once I do that, the data gets created within this particular entity. Now that you have seen how to create an entity and how to add data to that particular entity on the cloud platform, let's try to understand how to use it in a studio project. To use entity in a studio project, the first thing that you need to do is to install a package called data services. To search for that, you just have to go to all packages, make sure that you have clicked on include pre-release and type data services. Once you do that, you'll get this particular package. For me, it is already installed. You will have to click on install, which will be here, and then click on save. Once you do that, the entities gets installed for you. You will get a ribbon icon called manage entities here and some activities under data service packages right here. So now that you want to use the entities that you have created on the automation cloud, you just have to click on manage entities and it will highlight you all the entities that has been created. For this, make sure that your UiPath assistant is connected to the right tenant. And also, I just wanted to highlight that to use entities, your studio version should be 20.8 at minimum. So once you click on manage entities, all the entities gets highlighted. You can change the name of the namespace to anything you want. I'll just type enterprise here and I'll click on save. Once I do that, the entities will be created for me to use in this particular project. And if I see under the enterprise namespace, I have my department and employee. Let's look at how to create records for these entities. And for doing that, I'll be using one of the Excel sheets that has all the information that I want in my entities. The sheet looks something like this. There is details of all the departments along with all the corresponding fields. And similarly, we have information of all the employees, the name, the department, and role. We want to put this particular information in our entities that we have just now created. Let's see how we can do that. In the interest of time, I'll quickly create a workflow that will read the Excel file and create the data table. And from there on, I will show you how to use the data service activities to push all these information in the entity that we have created. So I have created a workflow that reads that particular Excel, reads the department, reads the employees, and right now it is iterating over each rows of the department and is ready to be absorbed into entities and getting added to the records of the entities that's there in the cloud. To do that, we have to create a variable called department of type department, which will be under the namespace enterprise like we created already. If we do that, now this department will hold all the properties that we created in the entity. And we just have to now match the department properties with the value that we want it to store. So for example, department.name should contain the name. Department.director should contain the name of the director of this department. Department.total employees will see the total number of employees, and department.inception date will hold on to the date of inception that was there in the Excel. And this will happen one by one while we read each record from the Excel. Now, I also have to assign department as a new object. And once I do that, my department will not throw the object reference not found error. Right. So now we have these values, and now we want to create the entity record. For that, I'll just drag and drop create entity record from data service activity packages. Select the right entity, which will be department in this case, and then put department as the input record, and I'll save it in department as well as the output record. The difference between these two is once the entity is created, this will also include the ID that gets auto-populated while creating the entity. I'll save this, and now let's just run this and see if this works out. I'm running the workflow. And it ran completely. Let's see if the entities were created. For that, I'll quickly switch to my data services. This is the department entity, and if I refresh this, there we go. All the values now have been added to this particular entity. Now we are going to create records for the employee entity, and for that I've already created a skeletal workflow back in the studio. Let me show you that. This is how it looks like. Previously, the workflow that I created, I have omitted that, and in place of that, I have done a very similar thing. I'm reading each record from the employee table, and I have done a skeleton work of adding this multi-assign, which will contain all the properties that needs to be added to the record in the employee entity. There is a minor difference though. The employee entity creates a relationship with the department, and to get that particular department relationship established within this particular entity, I first need to know which department it is related to. And to find that particular fact, I'll be using query entity records within the data services. I can drag and drop it here, choose the entity type as enterprise department, and build my query. There is a niche query builder that is provided within query entity records activity, where you can simply drag and drop and select the field that you want to use in this particular query. In my case, it will be the name field, which will contain the name of the department, and the right side of it, that is the value that I want that particular name field to contain, will be matched against the record that is being read from the Excel. And for that, I'll use row department and to string to convert it into string. If I had multiple conditions, I could have added here. There is also facility of applying queries to already filtered values, kind of like subquery that works in SQL. And if you add a row, that will give you a chance to add multiple filter conditions on the same data set. For now, we'll keep it simple. We'll just say that name equals to row department should suffice. And this would basically give me a list of departments, right? But I know that there is only one department of a single name. Basically, it's very unique in terms of names. So I can sufficiently assume that the value that is being returned in this list is going to be only one element. Now that we have the department filtered out and recognized from the department's table, we can actually go ahead and associate it with our value that is going in the entity record. For me, like I said, there is going to be only one element within this particular list, so I'll just say department 0 and that should suffice. The way we created a variable for a department, similarly we are going to create an entity for the employee as well, and for that I'll just type employee, and from here I'm going to choose a type employee, and I'll see within the enterprise namespace I have an employee entity created. Once I do that and save it, I'll be able to use the property of the employee directly here, and I will match the field against the correct values from the Excel. Employee name, employee role, and then employee department. And that's pretty much it. One last thing, just to make sure that the object reference error does not happen, I'll put an assign and initialize my employee object as well. New enterprise dot employee. So I have my employee being initialized, and then I'm querying the department for the correct department to be recognized and pulled down. And then using the multi-assign, I'm assigning all the values to create the record for the employee entity. The last step, like we did for the department, is to create the entity record. And for that, I'll just drag and drop the create entity record from the data service, choose the right entity type, put the employee entity here, and we can put it back outside here to get the one that has already been entered out of this particular activity. And now that everything looks good, let's just run it and see if it works. It has executed, it has completed the execution. Let's confirm by going back to the orchestrator. I'll go back to the orchestrator quickly. It's the department entity is open. I'll go back. I'll open the employee entity, I'll go to the data, and there you go. All the data have been added, the one that we wanted to add to it. And this is basically these departments are being pulled in reference to the entity department and specifically to the name, uh, the field with the name as name. And that's pretty much it. We were able to create the data, we were able to query the data, and we were able to put relationships directly from the workflows. The one last thing that I want to discuss about data service is the access management. And for that, I want to go back to the data service and go to user management. In here, I have the ability of adding new users and groups. For example, if I want to add myself, I'm actually already added. But if I want to add myself, I'll just simply select it. I can click on edit, and then I can choose the roles that has already been created. And this role is going to define the kind of access you're going to have over entities. To look what these roles look like, go to the roles tab and click on the view. I'm currently viewing the admin permissions, which has the ability of managing the permissions, but have no control over the schema of the entity or the data that is being entered into these entities. In the data reader permission, we have the read permission for both schema and data and no manage permissions. For the data writer, we have the permission of reading the schema and creating, editing, reading and deleting data from the entities. And similarly for designer, we have no right over writing records to the data, but we have the complete control over reading, creating, editing, and deleting the schemas. And with that, we come to the end of this particular demo. In this particular demo, we were able to replicate a simple model of employee and department, create the entities on the cloud, and push the data from an Excel first into the department and then into the employee with relationship back into the department. I hope you liked this particular demo. My name is Anubhav Shankar, and you can find me on LinkedIn, and we can keep the conversation going there. Thank you so much.